I've never told this story in full before, not to my friends, not to my coworkers, no one. But lately, it's been weighing on me. It's been years since everything happened, and while I've moved forward, I still can't shake the resentment. So here I am, putting it all out there. I'm 24 now, but this story starts when I was 18, fresh out of high school, thinking I was about to start my life. Growing up, it was just me and my mom. My dad was never in the picture, and she worked hard to keep us afloat. We weren't well off by any means, but we got by. I respected her for it, even if we didn't always get along. She could be strict, sometimes even dismissive, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. Then she met David when I was 16, and everything changed. David was smooth, the kind of guy who knew exactly what to say to make people like him. At first, I didn't think much of it. My mom had dated before, but no one had ever stuck around. David was different. He had 2 kids, Alyssa 14 and Jake 12. Within 6 months of dating, my mom invited them to move in. Within a year, she married him. That's when I stopped existing. Suddenly, everything revolved around David and his kids. My mom bent over backward for them new clothes, amusement park trips, restaurant outings. When Alyssa decided she wanted to redecorate her room, Mom let her. She got all new furniture, brand new bedding, even a vanity with lights. Meanwhile, I was still using the same desk we bought at a yard sale when I was 12. It wasn't just the material things. It was the way I was suddenly an afterthought. Take birthdays, for example. When I turned 16, my mom made a boxed cake at home, and we had a quiet dinner. My big gift was a set of towels because, in her words, you'll need them when you move out one day. Alyssa's 16th birthday? A huge catered event with a DJ, a massive cake, half the town invited, and a brand new car. I don't think I've ever felt smaller than I did that night, watching her pose next to her shiny new car while my mom beamed with pride. Then there was Jake. He got into basketball, and my mom enrolled him in every camp, bought him expensive gear, and even drove him 2 hours each way for training on weekends. Meanwhile, I had spent years asking to take piano lessons, only to be told we couldn't afford it. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that it was just how things were, that I only had a couple more years until I could move out and build my own life. But then they took my room. One day, David and my mom sat me down and told me that Alyssa needed a study space. Apparently, she required a quiet environment to focus on her schoolwork. Their solution? Turning my bedroom into her study. I was moved into a tiny, barely furnished guest room at the back of the house. The bed took up nearly all the space, and I had a single dresser that barely fit my clothes. Meanwhile, Alyssa's new study room sat mostly unused, except when she was taking selfies or making TikToks. That was when I started counting down the days until I could leave. I picked up 2 part-time jobs in high school, working every spare hour I had to save for college. By the time I graduated, I had $6,500 in my bank account. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover my first year of community college and still have a little left over for books and supplies. I was proud of myself. Then, 3 weeks before classes started, I logged into my bank account. The money was gone. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a glitch. Maybe I was looking at the wrong account. But after a few frantic refreshes, I knew something was wrong. I called the bank in a panic, hoping they could tell me what happened. They did. The money had been withdrawn by someone with access to the account. There was only one other person on it, my mom. I felt like I was going to be sick. I confronted her that same day. I walked into the living room, my hands shaking, and asked her if she had taken my money. She didn't even look guilty. She just nodded like it was no big deal, like she hadn't just wiped out every penny I'd worked for. I asked her why. Her answer? David needed help with some things for the kids. They're starting school too, you know? I think that was the exact moment I realized I was nothing more than a resource to her. I yelled. I pleaded. I told her that money was for my future. She just shrugged and said, "You're part of this family. We all have to pitch in." No. I wasn't part of this family. I was just a tool, a piggy bank she could crack open whenever it was convenient. That night, I packed a suitcase. I didn't have a backup plan, but I knew one thing: I wasn't staying there. I called the one person I knew I could trust, my cousin Emily. She was 10 years older than me, had a small apartment about 30 minutes away, and had always been my safe space growing up. When I told her what happened, I could barely get the words out through my tears. "Come here," she said without hesitation. "Stay as long as you need. We'll figure it out." And so I left with nothing but a suitcase and whatever I could grab in the few minutes before walking out the door. I left behind the home I'd grown up in. I didn't even feel sad, I just felt free. Leaving home that night was one of the hardest and best decisions I ever made. I had no plan, no savings, just a single suitcase stuffed with my clothes and whatever I could grab in a hurry. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going back. Emily was waiting for me when I got to her place. She lived in a small but cozy one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it felt warm, safe. The second I walked in, she hugged me tight and said, "You don't have to explain anything right now. You're here, that's all that matters." I think that was the moment I let go. I broke down sobbing, and Emily just let me. She didn't ask questions, didn't push. She handed me a blanket, ordered pizza, and put on some random sitcom to fill the silence. She made everything feel normal, even when my whole life had just collapsed. The first few days were rough. I felt lost, empty. I had spent years believing my mom had my back, even when she prioritized David and his kids. But after she took my future away without a second thought, I couldn't deny it anymore. She didn't see me as her daughter, she saw me as an ATM. The worst part? She didn't even try to reach out. No text, no call, nothing. It was like I'd disappeared and she didn't even notice. Emily, on the other hand, didn't let me wallow for long. After a few days, she sat me down at her kitchen table with a notebook and said, "All right, what's next? You're not just going to sit here feeling sorry for yourself." She helped me make a plan. Step 1, get a job. I had experience working part-time in high school, so I started applying everywhere. Within a week, I landed a job at a coffee shop near Emily's apartment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. Step 2, open a new bank account. Step 3, figure out school. Slowly, painfully, I started putting my life back together. Meanwhile, back at home, I didn't hear from my mom, but I did hear about her. My uncle Danny was still in contact with me. He wasn't exactly close to my mom, but he always tried to keep the peace. One night, he called me, and after some small talk, he let it slip. "Your mom's been working overtime," he said. "David's been out of work again, and she's struggling to cover everything." I felt nothing. For years, I'd watched her break her back to keep David and his kids comfortable while I was treated like an outsider. Now that I was gone, she had to face the reality of her own decisions. Danny kept talking. Alyssa joined some expensive dance team. Jake's getting private guitar lessons. Oh, and your mom bought Alyssa a new iPhone for her birthday. I actually laughed. Of course she did. Even after stealing from me, even after working herself into the ground, she still found a way to spoil them. "Sounds like they're doing just fine without me," I said coldly. Danny sighed. "Look, I'm not saying you should forgive her, but she's still your mom. Maybe one day you two can talk." I didn't answer. What was there to say? New life, new perspective. By the time I turned 20, things were finally looking up. I had saved enough to move into a shared apartment with 2 other students, and I was taking classes part-time. I was still working at the coffee shop, but at least now I had a plan. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to tiptoe around a house where I wasn't wanted. I didn't have to beg for scraps of attention. I was building my own life without them. What shocked me the most, though, was how much my mental health improved. I hadn't even realized how much stress I'd been carrying until I wasn't living under the same roof as David and his entitled kids. No more constant comparisons. No more maybe next times. No more feeling like an outsider in my own home. I was done. I was happy. Then, out of nowhere, my mom decided to reappear. It started with a text, "Hey, we need to talk. Call me when you have a second." I stared at my phone, debating whether to reply. What did she even want? It had been 2 years since I'd left. She hadn't cared then, so why now? Then she called. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Big mistake. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The second I answered, she went straight into her pitch. "Alyssa is starting college," she said, as if that was supposed to mean something to me. "She's decided dorm life isn't for her. It's too noisy, and she needs her own space." I already knew where this was going, so we've been looking at apartments near campus, she continued. "We found a nice one-bedroom. It's only $1,500 a month." I felt my stomach tighten. That's when she dropped the bomb. "I was hoping you could help with the rent. You're doing well now, right?" I almost laughed. She wanted me to pay $1,500 a month for Alyssa's apartment? Was she serious? "Are you actually asking me to pay for Alyssa's place?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Not the whole thing, just part of it. Maybe $1,000 a month." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who emptied my bank account for David's kids, the same woman who treated me like a burden. And now, after years of silence, the first thing she wanted from me was money. I felt something inside me snap. "No," I said firmly. Mom's tone immediately changed. She sighed dramatically. "I raised you better than this. Family helps." I clenched my jaw. "You're right. And you made it very clear where I stood in the family a long time ago." She started rattling off about sacrifice, about how much she'd done for me, about how I was selfish for refusing to help. "I wasn't falling for it. I'm not paying for Alyssa's apartment," I repeated. End of story. And then I hung up. If she thought she could guilt trip me back into being her personal bank, she was dead wrong. But I should have known better, because my mom wasn't the type to take no for an answer. And this was far from over. After I hung up, I sat there for a while, staring at my phone. My hands were shaking not with fear, but with rage. I shouldn't have answered. I knew better. I knew she wasn't reaching out because she missed me or wanted to fix our relationship. She wanted money. That's all I'd ever been to her, a resource, a backup plan. Yet even though I knew I wasn't wrong, a tiny voice in my head whispered, "What if you're being too harsh?" That's the thing about family, the guilt doesn't just disappear. But I wasn't going to fall for it. Not this time. For 2 days, I ignored her texts. She sent a few passive-aggressive messages at first, stuff like, "I hope you're thinking about doing the right thing," and "We all have to make sacrifices for family." But when I didn't respond, she cranked up the manipulation. The next text was a long, dramatic paragraph about how she was struggling, how she was on the verge of losing everything, and how I just don't understand the pressure she was under. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. This woman had worked overtime for years to pay for everything. Alyssa and Jake wanted dance classes, music lessons, new phones. She found plenty of money when it came to them, but now that she had to deal with the mess she'd created, suddenly she was the victim? No, not my problem. I deleted the message without responding. But I should have known she wouldn't stop there. She pulled in backup. The next person to call me was Uncle Danny. I liked Danny well enough, but he was one of those people who tried to keep the peace at all costs. He didn't like conflict, and he definitely didn't like choosing sides. So when his name popped up on my phone, I already knew what this was about. "Hey," he said way too casually. "Your mom's been really upset lately." I sighed. "Danny, I'm not saying you should give her money," he rushed to add. "But maybe you could hear her out. She's really struggling." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "She's struggling because she made bad decisions." "That's not my responsibility," Danny sighed. "I get it, I do. But she's still your mom. And you know how she is. She's proud. It must have taken a lot for her to ask for help." I nearly laughed. "Danny, she didn't ask for help, she demanded it. and she didn't call to check on me or to fix our relationship. The first thing she did was ask for money. There was a long pause. "I get where you're coming from," Danny said carefully. "But don't you think you're being a little harsh?" That was it. That was the moment I snapped. "Harsh?" I repeated. "Danny, she stole my college fund. She spent years making sure David's kids had everything while I got leftovers. Now, after all that, she wants me to pay for Alyssa's apartment? No! I don't owe her anything." Danny was quiet for a long time before he finally sighed. "I get it," he said, sounding tired. "I just hate seeing the family like this." That made me laugh bitterly. "What family?" She made it clear years ago that I wasn't part of it. He didn't have much to say after that. He just mumbled something about hoping we could all move past this someday and hung up. And honestly, that was fine with me. But apparently, my mom wasn't done because a day later, Alyssa reached out. Alyssa enters the chat. I hadn't spoken to Alyssa in years, not since I'd left. So when I saw her name pop up on my phone, my first thought was, oh hell no. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. Her message was short. "Hey, I heard you're not helping with my apartment. Not sure why you're being so difficult about this, but it's literally just rent." I had to read it twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Just rent? Just $1,500 a month, like that was nothing? I stared at the message for a long time, debating how to respond. Then I decided I wasn't going to. I wasn't about to waste my energy arguing with a spoiled brat who had never worked a day in her life. So I left her on read. A few hours later, another message came in. "You know you've always been bitter. I don't get why you hate me so much. Just because mom treated me better than you doesn't mean it's my fault." Wow. I could have said a lot of things. I could have listed every single time she got everything while I got ignored. I could have told her how much it hurt when mom took my bedroom for her, or how humiliating it was to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. But she wouldn't get it. She never would. So I did the only thing I could. I blocked her. The final straw, a week passed, and things were quiet. I thought maybe, finally, my mom had gotten the message. Then she left me a voicemail. It was long, dramatic, and dripping with emotional blackmail. She sobbed about how she was on the verge of losing everything, how Alyssa was devastated that I wouldn't help, and how she couldn't believe how cold I'd become. For a split second, it got to me. That little voice in my head whispered again, "What if she really is struggling? What if you're being too cold?" But then I remembered something Emily had told me after I first moved in with her. "Your mom doesn't miss you. She misses what you did for her." And she was right. My mom didn't care about fixing things between us. She didn't care about how I felt or how much she'd hurt me. She cared about what I could do for her. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me back into her life just because she needed money. So I did the one thing I should have done a long time ago. I blocked her number. I blocked her emails. I blocked her on everything. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. But I should have known better. Because my mom, she wasn't the type to give up that easily. And the next person to get involved was David. That's when things got ugly. I should have known blocking my mom wasn't the end of it, because the next person to reach out was David. I hadn't thought about him in years. He was like a background character in my life, always there, always taking, but never someone I'd actually connected with. He wasn't a stepfather. He was just my mom's husband. So when an unknown number popped up on my phone, I wasn't expecting his voice. "Hey there," he said, all fake friendly, like we were old pals catching up. Been a while. My stomach twisted. I hadn't heard his voice since the day I'd left. "What do you want, David?" I asked, already exhausted. He let out this fake chuckle, the kind people use when they think they're in control of the conversation. "Look, I know there's been some tension. But your mom tells me you're refusing to help with Alyssa's apartment." "That's disappointing." I clenched my jaw. "Disappointing? Really? You mean like when my college fund disappeared into thin air?" He sighed like I was the difficult one. "That was years ago. You need to move on." I could feel my blood boiling. Move on! He had the nerve to tell me that, after everything they'd done. I did move on, David, the first snapped. That's the whole point. I left. I built my own life. And none of that includes funding an apartment for your spoiled daughter. His tone shifted, colder. You're making a big mistake, he said. Your mom is under a lot of pressure. If you don't step up and do your part, it's going to break her. Is that what you want? There it was, the guilt trip. The same manipulation my mom used. Let me make something clear, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not responsible for cleaning up the mess you and Mom created. If you need money, get a job. That hit a nerve. His voice snapped from fake calm to angry. You ungrateful little, I hung up. And then I blocked his number too. The fallout for the next few days, I waited for the next attack. Would my mom find another family member to pressure me? Would Alyssa try again? Would David show up at my apartment and pound on my door? I didn't know. But then the unexpected happened. Uncle Danny called again. You're not going to believe this, he said. Try me, he sighed. David gave your mom an ultimatum. Either she figures out a way to pay for Alyssa's apartment, or he's leaving. I nearly dropped my phone. Wait, he's threatening to leave her over this? Yeah. And she's panicking. She's talking about dipping into her retirement savings just to keep him happy. I felt a sick sense of déjà vu. This was exactly what she'd done to me. She'd drained my money for David's kids. And now, after everything, she was still willing to sacrifice herself for him. I exhaled slowly. So what? She wants me to fix it? Danny hesitated. I think she just wants someone to tell her she's making the right choice. She's not. I know. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Danny sighed. I don't know what you want to do with this information, but I figured you should know. Thanks, Danny, I muttered. But I think we both know how this ends. David walks out. A few weeks passed. Then one night, Emily knocked on my bedroom door, phone in hand. It finally happened, she said. I blinked. What? She held up her phone. It was a text from my mom. David left me. I stared at the words. I'd known it was coming. I'd told Danny, told Emily, told myself. David would leave the second my mom was no longer useful to him. And yet, seeing it in writing still sent a strange feeling through my chest, not sadness, not happiness, just confirmation. It was never about love for David. It was never about family. It was about what my mom could give him. And the moment she couldn't give any more, he was gone. The aftermath, my mom tried to call me. I didn't answer. She tried again and again. I finally let one call go to voicemail. Her voice was small, broken. I know I don't deserve it, but can we talk? That was it. No manipulation, no guilt trip, just a plea. And for the first time in a long time, I hesitated. Did I want to talk to her? She had spent years putting David and his kids first. She had spent years treating me like I was nothing. She had let him drain her, use her, take everything from her. But now she had nothing left, and now she wanted to talk. I sat with that question for a long time, and in the end, I texted back, meet me at the coffee shop tomorrow at noon. And I waited. The next day, I sat at a small table in a quiet coffee shop, waiting. I didn't know what I was expecting: an apology, a last-ditch guilt trip, some kind of explanation for why she'd thrown me away so easily. All I knew was that I wasn't the same person I'd been when I left her house with a suitcase. She walked in a few minutes late. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but like the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. Her eyes flicked around the cafe until she saw me. She gave a hesitant smile, the kind people give when they're not sure if they're welcome. I didn't return it. She sat down across from me, folding her hands together like a nervous child. Thanks for meeting me, she said softly. I just nodded. For a long, long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of things left unsaid. Finally, she sighed and looked down at the table. David's gone, she said quietly. I tilted my head slightly. I know. She swallowed hard, as if hearing me say it out loud made it real. He took everything. I raised an eyebrow. Everything? She let out a bitter laugh. Everything I had left, yeah. He drained what little money I had, took the car, and left me with the bills. He won't even answer my calls. I wanted to feel something for her pity, sympathy, even a sliver of sadness, but I didn't. Because this was the exact path she'd chosen. She'd let him drain me. She'd let him push me aside. She'd let him use her over and over, and now she was the one left behind. I took a slow sip of my coffee. So why am I here? She flinched slightly. I wanted to talk. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. She kept going. I was blind. I see that now? I thought I was doing the right thing holding the family together. But David never wanted a family. He just wanted someone to take care of him. I raised an eyebrow. And it took him walking out for you to realize that? She exhaled shakily. I know it's too little, too late. But I swear, if I could go back, I'd do everything differently. I leaned forward slightly. Would you? She blinked. What do you mean? Would you really have done anything differently? I asked, my voice even. Because for years, you made the same choices over and over. Even when I begged you to see what was happening, you ignored me. And then, the second you needed something, you expected me to be there. Her face twisted. I was doing the best I could. I shook my head. No, you were doing what was best for David. And now that he's gone, you're here acting like suddenly you see things clearly. She sucked in a breath but didn't argue, because we both knew the truth. If David hadn't left, she wouldn't be sitting here. She would still be putting him first. She would still be expecting me to clean up the mess. She dropped her gaze to the table. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered. I miss you. I clenched my jaw, because a long, long time ago that sentence would have meant the world to me. A long time ago, I would have given anything to hear her say she wanted me. But now I didn't trust her, and I didn't know if I ever would. I exhaled. I don't know what you want from me. She swallowed hard. I just want a chance to fix things, to be in your life again. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her. Would I ever be able to really forgive her? Would I ever be able to trust that she wasn't just trying to find another lifeline? I didn't have an answer. Finally, I sighed. I need time. She nodded, blinking fast, like she was holding back tears. I understand. We sat there for another minute, the silence stretching between us. Then I stood up. I have to go. She didn't try to stop me. She just sat there, watching as I walked away. That was 6 months ago. Since then, my mom has sent me the occasional text, mostly just hope you're doing okay, or I miss you. Nothing too heavy. I haven't replied. Not because I hate her, not because I want revenge, but because I still don't know if I want her back in my life. Forgiveness isn't simple. It's not some switch you flip just because someone says they're sorry. I spent years fighting for her love. I spent years watching her give everything to David and his kids while I got nothing. And now I finally have my own life. I have peace. I have stability. And I won't let her take that from me. Maybe one day we'll talk again. Maybe one day I'll let her in carefully, cautiously. But today I'm moving forward on my own terms.